Hi, you may have seen my daughter and I on these cooking videos before, but today you get the benefit of my husband. He is going to make oyster stew, which is a tradition at our house at Christmas. And it's wonderful, and I'm going to turn it over to him. Okay? This is Chris, by the way.
Merry Christmas. Hi, my name's Chris, and today we're going to make our Christmas oyster stew. This is in demand by our children ever since they were little, and we'd have it on Christmas Eve every year. And we're still doing that as they come home. Some of the very basics are the ingredients: a pound of bacon that we'll chop and slice into small pieces. Then we've got the basic vegetables, starting with the potato. We'll do two medium-sized potatoes diced. We'll also do diced a couple, probably a cup and a half of celery, a cup and a half of onions, and a cup and a half of carrots. We then have the spices, of course, and we'll go through those while we're cooking, including garlic and rosemary and salt and pepper. And then we use, in our family, we use almond milk as the big creamy, and we also add some heavy whipping cream, which makes it really have a lot of body. We also have dry sherry, which flavors it in butter. I think that's pretty much it. We're gonna get started and we're gonna do some cooking. Oh, and the star of the show, by the way, are the oysters. You'll need about a little over 4 cups of oysters, almost 6 cups if you can get them. And I'll show you how to treat the oysters as we get along. With that, let's cook. So one of the things we want to do to get started is to strip the leaves off of the fresh rosemary from our herb garden. And Dorothy just went out and picked. And what you do is you just pinch off the leaves right above the woody part. You don't want the little woody stems in there. You can stay up the leaf a little ways. It helps. And we'll get this ready. And we'll put this in, it'll go in later, but I want to get it done because I'm going to be busy with other things later on. And also, one of the things it does is it adds a really nice aroma to the kitchen when you're cooking. And then we'll take the knife and we'll just rough chop this a little bit. Okay. Now, one other thing, we have 2 cloves of garlic, and we will finely mince these. So you want to get them cut very thin to begin with. Get right down to your fingers, and then mince them. You can also buy minced garlic in a jar with some oil, and that would work just fine as well, and I use that fairly regularly in the kitchen. And we're going to start with the bacon. And so you want these in about, a little less than 1/2 inch cuts. And you can do it right across. This is a 1 pound package of bacon. And that'll be the first thing. We're going to go right through this with the steps that I think you should use so that the pieces are being cooked while you're doing other actions. All right. So we're going to start with the bacon, get that in the pot, and get it cooking. Get some of the fat rendered out of it. That will get going. And then we're going to do our onions. We want them chopped up fairly well, almost, I wouldn't say diced, or minced, but certainly chopped fairly well. We'll get that rendered down a little bit. and then we'll be ready for these onions to go in. And while we're waiting for that, we will start with the potato. I scrub the potatoes, I leave the skin on. I think it adds a little more flavor, but they're well scrubbed on the outside. You don't really need to cut these too small because as they cook, they will essentially begin to dissolve on the outside a little bit, which is just fine. It gives the body, or gives the stew a little more body. And we'll just take our onions, roughly 2 cups of onions. Dorothy says I should use measurements all the time. That was roughly 2 cups. I rarely cook with recipes, so this is kind of do what seems right. And the bacon and the onions now, we'll get those onions fairly well browned up in the bacon fat.
My 2 cents here. He has to use measurements so that you can make it and it will turn out exactly like his, right? That's why. But
it's just that rarely mine turns out the same exact way every
right.
time.
Well, we'll see how this one turned out, and if they want to replicate it, they can use the right measurements.
So we'll have 2 medium-sized potatoes. Alright, so I add the garlic, and I add the rosemary, and Old Bay seasoning. Am I talking? Stir in the herbs and the seasoning. And you can see the bacon's starting to get crispy. And now we're going to be adding all the other vegetables. And we'll start with the potatoes. And then the celery and the carrots. Give that a quick stir. The vegetables are going to sweat a little bit, so we aren't going to use, some folks would call for chicken broth at this point. I think it's better just to have the vegetables get their liquid in there. But in order to help that along, we use 1 cup of dry sherry. That's extra dry sherry. And if you're like me, there's a little left in the bottle, you give some to the cook. All right, so now we're gonna get those things. They will sweat the moisture out of the vegetables, and the vegetables will continue to cook in there. And then I want to show you one other liquid that we want to put in, and that's separating the oysters. Okay, so to get a little more fluid for in our pot, we'll take a little sieve and just drain the oysters into a container like a measuring cup. Doesn't have to be real dry. The purpose for this is you not only get the liquid that you need, but you also get the oyster flavoring, and you don't throw it away.
Okay, as the sous chef, I just wanted to tell you that it's hard to find fresh oysters. year round, especially if you live in Minnesota. These I got at Costco, but nobody had them at any of our grocery stores until mid-November. So we're using fresh oysters, and he can tell you more about that.
Well, they're obviously well packed, so they're fresh oysters. They aren't frozen prior to shipping, and you can tell by the top. If they come in just an open, more or less container with a little seal on, that's probably a frozen oyster now. As a biologist, I can tell you, in the bowl we have kind of a mix of some gigantea, some other species of the oysters, primarily from Puget Sound area. So you'll have a whole variety, it looks like, in here, but that's good. It broadens the flavor base. So now what we want to do, now that we've got our oysters draining, is take the liquid and add that to the pot. And that'll impart a huge amount of the oyster flavor to the vegetables, and it essentially makes a stock of oyster liquid. And now this is going to cook for, probably the better part of, at least 45 minutes, and it'll get cooked down. And then what we'll do is we'll come back, we'll add the oysters, and we'll add the creamy base, the almond milk and the heavy whipping cream. And then we'll add a little bit of butter toward the end, and then we'll sit down and enjoy it. So we're back. It's been simmering now for about 45 minutes. As you can see, I put the oysters in the refrigerator. That's an important thing to do with the oysters after you've drained them, is to get them back in the refrigerator to keep them fresh. And then we're going to add all of the oysters to the base and make sure they get stirred in well. You just kind of want to fold them in initially so they don't break up. And once you have them folded in, then I'll start with 2 cups of heavy whipping cream. And then I'm going to add, I'll stir that. Now, if you like very heavy stew-like oyster stew, you could end at this point and add some butter. Our family prefers it not quite that heavy, and so I'm going to add some almond milk, and I will add a fair bit of almond milk, actually, because our family prefers a little thinner oyster stew, and it'll also thicken up a little more as the potatoes go throughout the stew. And this is going to then sit on the stove on very low, or I should say low to medium heat. You don't really want it to boil. It can come to a simmer, and that's when you will serve it. And we will serve it in a few minutes.
Did you put your makeup on?
You know, I forgot to do my blush.
Oh, Cooper. Don't you know how to do videos by now? Don't cry. It's okay.
Okay, oyster stew is being served. So, here's to another Christmas of health and wealth to all of us. And usually we would have baguette bread with this, right?
And oyster crackers.
And oyster crackers. But tonight we're giving it a taste without that, and because nobody went to the store. So let's give it a taste. Perfect again.
No.
year
pretty good, though.
after year.
Yeah, just how I remember it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
A definite classic tradition at our family, and maybe should be at yours too.
Cheers.
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 Cheers.